Book 1, Chapter 5, Part 6 of History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by HearHis.com. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1, by Henry Charles LEA, Book 1, Chapter 5, The Kingdoms of Aragon. Part 6. Although the briefs were thus dormant, they became the central point of the contest. On September 24th, Charles dispatched to Rome Lope Huardo de Mendoza as a special envoy with long and detailed instructions. He had been advised, he said, that the Pope intended to issue a bull revoking all inquisitorial commissions, save that of Cardinal Adrian, that in future the bishops with their chapters in each see were to nominate two persons of whom the Inquisitor-General was to select the fittest and present him to the Pope for confirmation. The acts of these inquisitors were to be judiciously investigated every 2 years, and their procedure was to conform to the common law and to the canons. The elaborate arguments which Charles urged against each feature of this revolutionary plan show that it was not a figment, but was seriously proposed with likelihood of its adoption. Moreover, he said that influences were at work to secure the removal of the sanbenitos of convicts from the churches, against which he earnestly protested. Ferdinand had refused 300,000 ducats offered him to procure this concession. In conclusion, Charles declared that no importunity should shake his determination to make no change in the Inquisition, and he significantly expressed his desire to preserve the friendship of His Holiness. What secret influences were at work to effect a complete reversal of papal policy, it would be vain to guess. But Mendoza had scarce time to reach Rome when he procured a brief of October 12th, addressed to Cardinal Adrian. In this, Sadoleto's choicest litany was employed to cover up the humiliation of conscious wrongdoing, in its effort to shift the responsibility to the shoulders of others. Charles' letters and Mendoza's message had enlightened him as to the intentions of the king with regard to the preservation of the faith and the reform of the Inquisition. He promised that he would change nothing, and would publish nothing without the assent of the king and the information of the Inquisitor-General, but he dwelt on the complaints that reached him from all quarters of the aravas and iniquity of the inquisitors. He warned Adrian that the infamy of the wickedness of his subdelegates redounded to the dishonor of the nation and affected both him and the king. He was responsible, and must seek to preserve his own honor and that of the king by seeing that they desist from this insolence, with which they disregarded the papal mandates and rebelled against the Holy See. While thus the 3 briefs were not revoked, they were practically annulled. The indignation of Aragonese at finding themselves thus juggled was warm, and found expression January 30th, 1520, in discontinuing the collection of the servicio. Charles was now at Corunna, preparing for his voyage to Flanders and thither. On February 3rd, the Diputados sent Azor Zapata and Ignio de Mendoza to procure the liberation of Prat and urged Charles to obtain the confirmation of the Concordia. To liberate Prat without a trial was tacitly to admit the correctness of his record. Yet, on April 21st, Cardinal Adrian issued an order for the fiscal to discontinue the prosecution and for the inquisitors to relax Prat. This order was presented May 1st to the inquisitors, but the word relaxation was that used in the delivery of convicts to the secular arm for burning. Prat stoutly refused to accept it and remained in prison. Charles embarked May 21st, and the rest of the year 1520 was spent in endeavors by each side to obtain the confirmation of their respective formulas of the Concordia, and in fruitless attempts by Charles to have the 3 briefs revoked. Though unpublished and virtually annulled, they were the source of great anxiety to the Inquisition. The correspondence between Charles and his Roman agents shows perpetual insistence on his part and perpetual promises and evasions by the Pope, sometimes on the flimsiest pretexts for postponement, the secret of which is probably to be found in a report by Juan Manuel, the Spanish ambassador, on October 12th, that the Pope was promised 46,000 or 47,000 ducats if he could induce the king to let the briefs stand. Thus it went on throughout the year, and when Leo died, December 1st, 1521, the briefs were still unrevoked. A year earlier, however, December 1st, 1520, he had confirmed the Concordia, in a bull so carefully drawn as not to commit the Holy See to either of the contesting versions. It was limited to the promises embraced in Charles' oath, and, as regards the articles, it merely said that the canons and ordinances and papal decrees should be inviolably observed, under pain of ipso facto excommunication, dismissal from office, and disability for reappointment. Either side was consequently at liberty to put what construction it pleased on the papal utterance. Charles, meanwhile, had been growing more and more impatient for the servicio so long withheld. He had written to Adrian and also to the inquisitors, ordering that the Concordia de Monzon, 1512, and that of Saragossa, according to his version, should be strictly obeyed, so that the abuses thus sought to be corrected should cease, and the people should pay the impost. The inquisitors dallied, and seemed to have asked him what articles he referred to, for he replied, September 17th, explaining that they were those of Monzon and Saragossa, the latter as expressed in the papers signed by Adrian and Gattinara. When, therefore, he received the papal confirmation of December 1st, he lost no time in writing, December 18th, to Adrian and the inquisitors, announcing it and ordering the articles to be rigidly observed without gloss or interpretation, so that the abuses and disorders prohibited in them may cease. But he was careful to describe the articles as those agreed on at Monzon and lately confirmed at Saragossa, in the form adopted by Adrian and Gattinara. The Aragonese, on the other hand, adhered to their version. The bull of confirmation seems to have reached Saragossa through Flanders, accompanied by a letter from Charles, and it was not until January 15, 1521, that the Diputados wrote to Adrian enclosing the royal letter and a copy of the bull. In obeying it, he conceded the Aragonese version of Concordia, though with a bad grace. From Tordesillas, January 28th, he wrote to the Diputados and the inquisitors that the bull must be obeyed, although it might properly be considered surreptitious, as it asserted that Charles had sworn to the fictitious articles inserted by Juan Prat, for which the latter deserved the severest punishment. In spite of this burst of petulance, however, he practically admitted Prat's innocence by ordering his liberation, and on February 13, 1521, the order was carried in triumph by the governor. The Diputados and a concourse of nobles and citizens to the Aljaferia and solemnly presented to the inquisitors, who asked for copies, and, with these in their hands, said that they would do their duty without swerving from justice and reason. So well satisfied were the Aragonese that to show their gratitude they had already on January 18th ordered the cities and towns to pay all current imposts as well as the suspended subsidio within 45 days. It may be added that finally Cardinal Adrian recognized the innocence of Prat in the most formal manner, in a letter of April 20th to the inquisitors, imposing silence on the fiscal and ordering the discharge of Prat and his securities. Triumph and gratitude were alike misplaced. Cardinal Adrian had followed his letter of January 28th with another of the 30th to the inquisitors, instructing them that the papal confirmation must be construed in accordance with the sacred canons and the decrees of the Holy See, so that they could continue to administer justice duly, and he encouraged them with an ayuda de costa, or gratuity. They went on imperturbably with their work. Not only was the Concordia of Saragossa never observed, but that of Monzon was treated as non-existent, and we shall see hereafter that, towards the close of the century, the Inquisition coolly asserted that the latter had been invalidated when Leo X released Ferdinand from his oath to observe it, and that the former had never been confirmed, and that there was no trace of either having ever been observed. The Inquisition, in fact, was invulnerable and impenetrable. It made its own laws, and there was no power in the land, save that of the crown, that could force it to keep its engagements. Meanwhile, the obstinacy of the Catalans, which detained the impatient Charles in Barcelona throughout the year 1519, secured, nominally at least, the formal confirmation by both Charles and Adrian of the Monzon Concordia of 1512, with additions. One of these provided that anyone who entered the service of the Holy Office, while liable to a civil or criminal action, should still be held to answer before his former judge, and that criminal offences, unconnected with the faith, committed by officials, should be exclusively justifiable in the civil courts. This struck at the root of one of the most serious abuses, the immunity with which the Inquisition shielded its criminals. And scarcely less important to all who had dealings with the New Christians was another article providing that property acquired in good faith from one reputed to be a Christian should be exempt from confiscation in case the seller should subsequently be convicted, even though the 30 years' prescription should still exist. The agreement was reached January 11, 1520, but experience of the faithlessness of the Inquisition had made the Catalans wary. They were about to grant a servicio to Charles, and they sought a guarantee by addressing to him a supplication that he should make Cardinal Adrian swear to the observance of the Concordia of 1512 and the new articles, and that he should procure within 4 months from the Pope a bull of confirmation, in which the bishops of Lerida and Barcelona should be appointed conservators, with full power to enforce the agreement. They offered to pay 200 ducats toward the cost of the bull, and they demanded that they should retain 20,000 libras of servicio until the bull should be delivered to the Diputados. The same condition was attached to a liberal donation of 12,000 libras, which they made to the Inquisition, probably a part of the bargain. Meanwhile, Charles was to give orders that the inquisitors should be bound by the articles, and, in case of infraction, satisfaction for such violation should be deducted from the 20,000 libras. In due time, August 25th, Leo X executed a formal bull of confirmation of the articles of 1512 and 1520, and appointed the bishops of Lerida and Barcelona as conservators. What was the value of the Concordia thus solemnly agreed to and liberally paid for, with its papal confirmation and conservators, was speedily seen when, in 1523, the authorities of Perpignan became involved in a quarrel with Inquisitor Juan Naverdu over the case of the wife of Juan Noguer. They complained of an infraction of the Concordia and applied to the Bishop of Lerida for its enforcement. He appointed Miguel Roeg, a canon of Elna, as the executor of his decision, who issued letters ordering the inquisitors and his secretary to observe the Concordia under pain of excommunication, and to drop the cases which they were prosecuting. Appeal was also made to Rome, and letters were obtained from Clement VII. Charles, however, intervened and obtained another brief, January 6, 1524, annulling the previous one and transferring the matter to Inquisitor-General Manrique. The result was that nearly all the magistrates of Perpignan, the consuls, the jurados, with their lawyers, and Miguel Roig, were obliged to swear obedience in all things to the Inquisition, were exposed to the irredeemable disgrace of appearing as penitents at the Mass, and were subjected to fines from which the Holy Office gathered in the comfortable sum of 1,115 ducats. The motto of the Inquisition was Noli me tangere, and it administered a sharp lesson to all who might venture, even under papal authority, to make it conform to its agreements. It was in vain that the sturdy subjects of the crown of Aragon struggled and gained concessions, paid for them, and fenced them around with all the precautions held sacred by public law. The inquisitors felt themselves to be above the law, and all the old abuses continued to flourish as rankly as ever. About this time the Cortes of the Three Kingdoms, by command of Charles, addressed to the Inquisitor-General Manrique a series of 16 grievances, repeating the old complaints: the extension of jurisdiction over usury, blasphemy, bigamy, and sodomy; the acceptance by the inquisitors of commissions to act as conservators in secular and ecclesiastical cases and profane matters; their arresting people for private quarrels and on trivial charges and insufficient evidence, leaving on them and their descendants an ineffaceable stain, even though they were discharged without penance; their multiplication of familiars and concealing of their names, appointing criminals and protecting them in their crimes; and finally their overbearing and insulting attitude in general. In answer to this, the Inquisitor-General contented himself with asserting that the laws were obeyed, and asking for specific instances of infraction, and the names of the parties, secure that no one would dare to come forward and expose himself to the vengeance of the tribunal. Again, in 1528, at the Cortes of Monzon, we find a repetition of grievances: the abuse of confiscations, the cognizance of usury and other matters disconnected with heresy and general inobservance of the articles agreed upon. To the petition that he remedy these and procure from the Inquisitor-General an order to his subordinates to conform themselves to the Concordias, Charles returned the equivocating answer: "His Majesty will see that the Inquisitor-General orders the observance to that which should be observed, removing abuses, if there are any." The imperial attitude was not such as to discourage the audacity of the inquisitors, and at the Cortes of Monzon, in September 1533, the deputies of Aragon presented to Inquisitor-General Manrique, who was present, 2 series of grievances. One of these he promptly answered by characterizing some of the demands as impertinent, scandalous, and illegal, and others as not worthy of reply. The other series was referred to Charles, and was not answered until December. It commenced by asking that the Concordia confirmed by Leo X in 1516 should be observed, to which the reply was that such action should be taken as would comport with the service of God and proper exercise of the Inquisition. The request that the inquisitors confine themselves to matters of faith was met with the assertion that they did so, except when under orders from their superiors. To the demand that the dowries of Catholic wives should not be confiscated, the dry response was that the laws should be observed. In this cavalier spirit the rest of the petition was disposed of, and the whole shows how completely the Holy Office was emancipated from any subjugation to the laws, which had cost such struggles to obtain, and which had been paid for so largely. While Manrique and the Suprema were at Monzon, they were called upon to take action with regard to troubles at Barcelona between the Inquisitor Fernando de Lorazes and the magistrates diputados. These had been on foot for some time. A letter from Charles from Bologna, February 25, 1533, to Loazes assures him of his sympathy and support, and, in September, the Suprema at Monzon resolved to send a judge thither to prosecute and punish the offenders for their enormous delinquencies. What were the merits of the quarrel do not appear, but it was doubtless provoked by the overbearing arrogance of Loazes, who, at the Cortes of Monzon, the Catalans represented to Charles that the pretensions of the inquisitor impeded the course of justice in matters involving the regalias or prerogatives of the crown, and asked to have him prosecuted by the Bishop of Barcelona. Charles thereupon addressed to Loazes a letter, January 16, 1534, forbidding him in future to interfere with the royal judges, as no one could claim exemption from the royal jurisdiction. At the same time he instructed his lieutenant for Aragon, Fadrique de Portugal, Archbishop of Saragossa, to enforce this mandate. It was not long before Loazes had the opportunity of manifesting his contempt for these expressions of royal will. One of the councils holding the Admiralty Court of Barcelona was hearing a case between two merchants, Juan Ribas and Gerald Camps. A quarrel ensued between them. Ribas, with his servant Juan Montseny, struck Camps in the face, and then, drawing his sword, threatened the consul's life. This was a scandalous offence to the dignity of the crown, under whose protection the court was held. By order of the archbishop and royal council, the culprits were arrested and thrown in prison. But Ribas was a familiar of the Inquisition, and Loazes presented himself before the archbishop in full court and claimed him. The letters of Charles V were read and his claim was rejected, whereupon, on June 13th, he issued a mandate demanding the surrender to him of Ribas and forbidding all proceedings against him under pain of excommunication. What was the termination of this special case we have no means of knowing, but Loazes did not suffer by reason of his audacity. In 1542 he was made Bishop of Elna, whence he passed by successive translations through the sees of Lerida, Tortosa, and Tarragona, dying at last, full of years and honours, in 1568 as Archbishop of Valencia. It is not worth while at present to pursue these disputes, which reveal the character of the Inquisition, and the resistance offered to it by the comparatively free population subject to the crown of Aragon. We shall have ample opportunity hereafter to note the persistent arrogance of the inquisitors under the royal favour, the restlessness of the people, and the fruitlessness of their struggle for relief from oppression. The Holy Office had become part of the settled policy of the House of Austria. The Lutheran revolt had grown to enormous proportions, and no measure seems too severe that would protect the faith from an enemy even more insidious and more dangerous than Judaism. The system grew to be an integral part of the national institutions, to be uprooted only by the cataclysm of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic War. At what cost to the people was this effected is seen in the boast in 1638 of learned official of the Inquisition that in its favour the monarchs had succeeded in breaking down the municipal laws and privileges of their kingdoms, which otherwise would have presented inseparable obstacles to the extermination of heresy. And he proceeds to enumerate the various restrictions on the arbitrary power of the secular courts, which the experience of ages has framed for the protection of the citizen from oppression, all of which had been swept away where the Inquisition was concerned, leaving the subject to the discretion of the inquisitor. End of Book 1, Chapter 5, Part 6. Recorded by hearhis.com.